As a psychotherapist, I had this idea that I would solve all my problems and then be this role model of a person to help other people. I was getting into really dysfunctional relationships and 2 marriages that ended in a bitter divorce. And the only way that I could control the shame that I had about that was to figure out what happened. And I realized that I'd never got a good answer when I blamed the narcissist who I was in relationship with. And once I figured out that I was a participant, that there was this dance, there was this unconscious magnetic pull, that I finally figured out that I am unconsciously falling in love with the same type of person over and over again. As my therapist once told me, I am falling in love with the same woman with a different face, or as she also said, I had a broken picker. And once I figured that out, everything made sense. Then I went on this journey to find out why that happened. And all of that resulted in me writing my book, The Human Magnet Syndrome. And it's through this book, I'm able to explain that this is not a coincidence. This is not bad luck. This can be stopped, but to stop it, we have to know what it is. And up until that point, no one did. And so I explain why opposite unhealthy, dysfunctional personality types, codependents, or whom I call people with self-love deficit disorder, always predictably, reflexively fall in love with narcissists and vice versa. And there are reasons for it. And so I spent a long time trying to explain to people the reason so that they can find the solution, that I attribute responsibility to the SLD, the codependent, because if we're going to solve a problem, we cannot be victims for the part that we have responsibility for. And so part of the Human Magnet Syndrome book and the contents of it is to explain what happened to we codependents or people with self-love deficit disorder as a child, and the trauma we experienced as children with a narcissistic parent, and how that deeply impacted us so that we felt that the narcissist seemed oddly familiar and oddly safe. As my dad would say, you start off as a soulmate and you end up as a cellmate. I don't really subscribe to the term empath when it is used to describe a person who is prone to fall in love with narcissists, who is stuck in a relationship with a narcissist, who can't get themselves to break free. And should they, the next person they see, the next person they fall in love with is the narcissist. I do believe that empaths is a very good and descriptive term that I use regularly for people who, irrespective of their background, mental health, positive or negatives, have this ability to be highly empathetic, highly sensitive to people. But it's not connected to codependency. It's an independent variable. You can be an empath and be really healthy, or you can be an empath and be an SLD or a codependent. So one of the things that I did with my book was I realized the world needed a new definition, because there are so many books out there and YouTube videos just that go on and on with everyone's unique definition of what a codependent is, what a narcissist is. So as a psychotherapist with 35 years of mental health experience, I utilize the tools that I was trained in, and those are diagnostic tools. You can't give a name to a person and say it's a mental health disorder unless there's a very specific diagnostic set of criteria. So I simplified it. And I'm going to, by answering what a codependent is, I'm then going to answer what a narcissist is. That a codependent, or someone with self-love deficit disorder, in a relationship gives most, if not all, the love, respect, and caring to the individual with whom they're connected to, romantically in love with, and they expect that it be reciprocated. Because of the Human Magnet Syndrome, and they fell in love with the pathological narcissist, which I'll explain in a second, they don't get that reciprocity, that mutuality. They get upset, they try to change it, And here's the most important part of the definition, they stay in a relationship. So the succinct version is someone who gives all the love, respect, and care in a relationship, wants it to be reciprocal, tries to make it mutual. They can't, and they stay in a relationship. And that explanation accounts for the various personality types. And we won't get into it, but I have different personality types for SLDs or codependents because people get confused and they think, well, one type of codependent is more narcissistic than the other. Again, what I did in my book, I had to create an explanation so people could understand the problem so that the treatment would work. And by changing the term self-love deficit disorder, first, I got it out of the stigmatizing, negative, judgmental codependent. Codependent was created for another disorder in the 70s that became another disorder and another disorder. But what I did was I created a very succinct definition of what it is. I explained where it comes from. And with that knowledge, for example, codependency, SLDD, comes from childhood attachment trauma, the development of subsequent core shame, deep bone-aching pathological loneliness, an addiction that requires us to stay in these environments that hurt us, but that we think are good for us. And at the very top is the disorder. And so instead of looking at what I call the top of my pyramid to understand what SLDD is, or codependency, I explained that those are just the symptoms, that the problems are deeper. At the bottom of the pyramid is attachment trauma. Attachment trauma is the experience of a child being raised with a narcissistic parent who can never love you for who you are, can only love you for what you do to them, how you make them feel good, or how you don't upset them. So you are raised in this family that you have to mold yourself into the person the narcissist needs, disavow your real self, and start your life from age 0 to maybe your teen years as kind of an imposter to your real self. And that attachment trauma is profound. From attachment trauma comes core shame. And that is the belief that one is fundamentally broken, unlovable, or not worthy of a loving relationship. And from core shame is pathological loneliness, is a bone-aching, searing pain. It's not just loneliness, but loneliness where you don't feel like you would have a right to live in this world or you are comfortable in your skin. Your shame is so bad, you don't think that anyone could ever love you unless somehow you take care of them. So we got attachment trauma, core shame, pathological loneliness, and the next part of the pyramid is SLDD, or codependency addiction. And that is the compulsive pursuit of the drug to take away the pain of shame and loneliness. And that is a relationship. The addiction is not to a narcissist. That would make no sense. But if you are addicted to a relationship and you're an SLD, you're always at a high 90% probability that next person will be a narcissist. So if you understand that SLDs or codependents give all the love, respect, and care in a relationship, and it's not reciprocated, then the pathological narcissist is someone who has a personality disorder of either narcissistic, borderline, or antisocial personality disorder, and demands, requires all of the love, respect, and caring, does not reciprocate, does not want to reciprocate, and manipulates the relationship to continue. The love, respect, and caring distribution helps explain what these two disorders are, why they match up, and why you can have so many different type of personality traits, but yet still be the same codependent. So what I've done, and I painstakingly, and most of my work, including my books, is I describe and categorize types of problems so people could understand. So everyone has a different way of explaining, and there are so many different names for it. So let's begin and stay with mental health concepts developed by researchers, academics, therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists. And a narcissist, there is a narcissistic personality disorder. And there are subtypes. And the subtypes are not even the diagnosis. So a covert narcissist is one of the subtypes of narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. And these individuals pretend rather successfully to be loving, giving, kind, empathetic individuals for the purpose of personal gain. They create this very realistic presentation to the outside world. But back at home in their private life, they are horrible monsters that have no or little empathy or concern for the people with whom they live. So this can be a therapist, this can be a doctor, it can be a teacher, it can be a rabbi, a priest who does an incredible job at convincing the world that they're a good guy or a good person. But they only do that because they know they are the narcissists that are conscious of it. They know that if they don't convince people of how likable and nice and talented they are, they have no life and they won't have any type of respect or place in the world. The problem with the narcissist, it's the unconscious attraction to them and feeling like that's the only type of love that feels right. So the reason that codependency treatment or therapy didn't work is they didn't know what codependency was and therefore had no idea on how to solve it. And so not only did I explain that, but in my subsequent work, following my human magnet syndrome books, is I created a treatment program called the Codependency Cure, most of which information is available at my selfloverecovery.com website. So when you know the problem and it seems scientifically logical, and you know of a therapy technique that can solve it, then you have good outcomes. Know the problem, understand where the problem comes from, understand or develop understanding for solutions that specifically solve that problem, then you can cure it. And that's why I came up with the term for my treatment program, the Codependency Cure. Knowing what codependency is, it's attachment trauma that comes from a child's the beginning of their life all the way up to their adolescence. So if we understand PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, if there is a horrific situation or injury or loss, and it's too much for a person to manage, the brain relegates it to a part of the brain and takes it offline. It becomes unconscious. In other words, because of the brain, we dissociate the memory and the feeling. We don't know, we don't remember, we don't feel it. And that is the brain's way of protecting us. So if we understand attachment trauma, that is just not PTSD. That's not chronic PTSD. That is trauma over a large swath of a person's life, starting from birth, sometimes to 17. And that trauma is so significant that the only way to survive really is to block it out, is to numb it out, to dissociate. So it's natural for any codependent, any self-love deficient person to have no recollection of the trauma that they experienced as a child because it's just too painful. So when we understand that, then it makes sense why when these adult SLDs or codependents take that, what I call relationship template that comes from the attachment trauma, and they bring that forward into relationships because of the chemistry and the opposite matching up, and once they get caught, they get trapped into the web of the narcissist, then it's too much pain. And they use what always has helped them. They block it off. They numb out, they dissociate. So one of my primary challenges for any person who comes to me from my self-love recovery treatment program, aka the Codependency Cure, is to acknowledge that they really don't know what happened. They don't remember it, and therefore not make them feel more ashamed of something that they're not ready to handle. So that is why it's so difficult for people to overcome codependency, because the solution requires you to know what part of the brain it's in and know a way to bring that out, because traditional therapy doesn't work. If the relationship fills a void that is so deep and empty and ultimately painful that your brain makes it so that you don't feel it, there is this huge consequence of even the idea of breaking up. But to understand why SLDs or codependents, they stay in a relationship, is because the relationship, remember, SLDD is an addiction, and it seeks a way to numb the person so they don't have to feel the loneliness, the core shame, and remembering the trauma. So it makes sense that they stay in these relationships because they don't know any other way to be in this world except with someone they want to work really hard to love that can never love them. It doesn't matter what you know or how smart you are, because the unconscious impact of what happened to you as a child and the replication of that powerlessness into your adult relationships, that to stop it, there's this feeling of you will fall apart and break and no one will love you. So if that is the problem, first of all, we know why it's impossible to break up. And we then know why the next relationship puts the SLD in with the narcissist. So then the solution requires a treatment program that incorporates every part of the SLD codependent problem and has therapy or treatment that is specifically designed to solve that problem. Like, for example, I have an 11-stage treatment program called the Self-Love Recovery Treatment Program. And one stage is just using my Healing the Inner Trauma Child trauma resolution method. And then there's 10 other stages, so that the way to solve the problem is to understand that every mental health psychological intervention has to match up with the problem and have a way to resolve it, which is why coaches do not work. You have to find someone who has a specific understanding of this disorder and what is needed to resolve it. So to solve self-love deficit disorder is to go through the treatment. And there is no easy way to go through the treatment. There's no type of pointers I can give someone to say, look in the mirror, smile, say you love yourself. Once a day, do something good for yourself. All these great superficial therapeutic techniques that some people use, they don't work. The only way to get to self-love is to understand how deeply it's embedded and rooted in you, and how that self-love deficit disorder is like, one of these trees that are invasive. The roots are everywhere. And that if you do something that makes you feel good, there's a really high probability you're covering up for how you really feel, because that's what many SLDs do. I wish I had an easy solution of telling people how to achieve self-love while in a relationship with a narcissist. It's impossible, because a narcissist has everything to lose if their partner, their lover, their wife, their spouse becomes self-love abundant. So they will actively try to break it down. A narcissist, as I described in the Human Magnet Syndrome, has a personality disorder. And that group of mental health disorders share the primary characteristic is that they don't know they have a problem, and therefore they don't think they need help. And should they be forced into getting help, they kind of break apart. So if someone has a personality disorder and they don't think they have a problem and they think everyone else is to blame, therapy doesn't work. Therefore, there's not a cure. The probability is almost zero, very small, that they'll go to treatment for the purpose of wanting to be better because they don't know they have a problem. So there's very little hope if they have narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, or antisocial personality disorder, which are the disorders that are naturally attracted to codependents. So in the human magnet syndrome, it simplifies things. It tells you what codependency is, and then it tells you that codependents are attracted to individuals with one of three personality disorders and or someone with an out-of-control addiction. And the addiction is a little bit in the gray area because if someone is a heroin addict, a sex addict, any type of addict, the addiction by itself drives a person to do things that are completely selfish, destructive to others, that are very narcissistic. But you cannot tell if that person is a narcissist unless the addict goes into treatment and stops his drug of choice. That's when you can tell if the person to begin with was either a codependent or a pathological narcissist or somewhere in between. But as an out-of-control addict, they resemble pathological narcissists. My website, Self-Love Recovery Institute, which is selfloverecovery.com, is the portal for everything that I do, whether it's treatment with me, educational resources, my books, and more. So selfloverecovery.com is the place to go. It would be my dream come true that therapists would learn this so that I'm not the only one doing this. So that is why I developed educational resources that were created for both general audience and the mental health practitioner.